Hello student. In last lecture we are talking about the principles of nomenclature which is essential for the naming of organism by a scientific name which is universally accepted for the identification of organism, and these principles are required for the proper naming of organism in a scientific way for their identification and classification. So in today's lecture we talking about the some rules which is applicable for the naming pattern or naming the scientific name for the organism for their identification and classification. So in today's lecture we talking about the rules of nomenclature which is essential for the scientific name application to the organism. So basically, let's start with the introduction. That is, in 1898, the International Congress of Zoology organized an international commission on zoological nomenclature to formulate a set of rules. So this International Congress of Zoology organized in 1898 and placed some rules for the zoological nomenclature, which would be binding for all taxonomical publication. So these rules which is published by the zoological international commission of zoological nomenclature, which is applicable all over the world for the scientific naming of organism. The aim of this international code of nomenclature is to make the stability in naming the taxa, avoiding the use of name which may cause error, ambiguity and confusion. So these international codes for the nomenclature to make the stability in naming of the organism or taxa and avoid the use of name which is synonyms or holonames for the organism and avoid the errors confusion among their name. So these codes or rules are important for give the scientific name to that organism for purpose of identification and classification. So the standardization and regulation of nomenclatural practice are using made at International Botanical and Zoological Congress. So these rules are standardized and legislation of nomenclatural practice are made by the International Botanical and Zoological Congress. So scientists give proper name, scientific name to the plants and organism in different way. So this naming pattern having these some rules are applicable to the give the scientific name to an organism are important. So let's see some rules regarding to the nomenclature of organism. So first rule, that is the system of nomenclature adopted is binomial system to indicate the specific name and trinomial for the subspecific name. So in first rules we say that the whatever the name given to an organism is maybe binomial which consists the two name, that is first one is generic name and second one is species name. So this generic name and species name consists the binomial system. If the organism having the subspecies on their locality or having some differences in their species and having the subspecies, then we apply the trinomial nomenclature, that is three name are given. So first one is generic name, second one is species name and third one is subspecies name. So this name or this system of nomenclature is adopted for give the name to an organism for their identification. So maybe it may be binomial or trinomial. For example, Rana tigrina is a bullfrog of the Indian. So Rana tigrina is a scientific name of Indian bullfrog. So Rana is a generic name and tigrina is a species name, where the Corpus splendens is a name of house crow which is found in Indian region. So this corpus is a generic name, splendens is a species name and splendens is a subspecies name. So this is applicable for the trinomial nomenclature. So both these nomenclature system are applicable for the scientific name of the organism. In second law, the name of the genus is single word in nominative singular and must begin with the capital letter. So whatever name is given to that organism, the binomial nomenclature or trinomial nomenclature, the generic name is always in capitalized word. or it start with the capital letter and having this single word of generic name. And the name of the species may be single or compound word and must begin with the small letters. So species name maybe is start with this smaller letter. It may be single or compound letter or word, but it start with the smaller letter, where the generic name is always start with the capital letter. So this is the rules applicable for the every scientific name of the species. So genetic name is always written in the capitalized word. The first letter is always capitalized, where the species name is always start with the small letter. In next law, the name of author who first published the name when describing it should follow the species name and should rarely be abbreviated and be printed in Roman type. So, whatever the author who published the scientific name for an species which describe their characteristics regarding to their identification or their classification and give scientific name to identify that specific species, author can be give their own name to that species followed by the species name. So for example, the Panthera leo is a name of lion. So Panthera is a generic name, Leo is a species name, and Linnaeus is a scientist who discovered the name of that organism. So Panthera leo Linnaeus is a scientific name of that organism. So Panthera is generic name, Leo is a species name, and Linnaeus who invented or who described the or publish the name of organism which followed by the species name, and it should be written as in a abbreviated form like Panthera leolin. So this lin is abbreviated form of the Linnaeus name. So these are written in the Roman type. So generic name, then generic name is always followed by species name, and if the author give their own name, it's followed by the after the species name. So that is the rule for the naming of scientific naming of the organism. So the author name is always followed after the species name. First one is generic name, second one is species name, and afterward the scientist or author give their own name, that is author name. So Panthera leo Linnaeus is an example of the author name. So the scientific name of animal and plant must be different. So in some way, the plants and animals having the different classification and different rules for the nomenclature, but in some time the scientists get confused and give the same name to some organism and some plants. So according to the rules of nomenclature, the plants and animals must have the different name for their identification. We cannot use the similar name for the plant or animals. They must have the different scientific name for their identification of animals and plants. Next one, that is the name must be in Latin and Latinized form and are usually printed in italics type. So whenever we write the scientific name in maybe binomial nomenclature or trinomial nomenclature, it written in a italic form or Latinized form and usually is printed in italic type. So whenever you print the scientific name of organism, is must be written in Latin or Latinized form and printed in a italics type. So these rule are must be followed by the scientist or taxonomist who print or give the name to that organism. So the name must be in Latin and Latinized form and are usually printed in italics type. Next one, that is within the animal or plant kingdom, no two genera can have same name, and within a genus, no two species have the same name. So whatever the plant kingdom, if plant kingdom or animal kingdom, they must have the different name for genera or different name for species. No two genera having the same name for different genera or same name for a different species. They must have the different name for each and every species which is found in the genera, and genera also having the different name. So according to that rule, these all the ge- genus or species having the different name for the identification of plant and animal. So animal kingdom or plant kingdom must follow the rule, that is two genera is not having the identical name or similar name. Also the two different species also not considered in a same name. So they must having this different name for their identification. So this rule must be followed for their identification and classification. Next one, that is the generic or specific name first published is only one recognized. All duplicates name are synonyms. So whenever the scientist or taxonomist give the scientific name to an organism, the first published name is only recognized, and generic recognize and all duplicate name are synonyms. In this rule you can say that the rules principle of priority is applicable. The oldest name is valid for the identification of organism, and these are must be followed by the scientist or taxonomist. The first genetic or specific name, when they first publish, it is applicable and recognizable. So the other name which is given for the same species are duplicates or synonym of that species, but they are not applicable as a scientific name for that species. So whatever the scientists give the name to that species, the oldest name of that species is prior for the identification of organism. So basically, the in this rule we can say that the principle of priority must be followed. The priority is given to that name which is the oldest name of that species. So this rule must be followed for the naming of the organism. So when the name of genus is not the one under which a species is placed by the original author, or if the generic name is changed, the original author name is written in parenthesis. So whenever the scientist gives a name, they must sometime the scientist or taxonomist change the generic name or species name for their identification and better understanding of the characters of specific species. But they must follow the rules for the parenthesis of the organism. So the scientist who give first name to that organism must be written after the species name, and this rule must be followed. If you change the name, generic name or species name of any organism or specific organism, the first author who give the first name to that organism must be followed the new name of that organism. So this rule must be followed for the identification, because sometimes these people know the oldest name and they cannot understand the new name of the same species, so that the whatever the scientist or author having described the first oldest give the first oldest name must be followed the new name by their name for the identification of new name for the same species. Next one, the formation of family and subfamily name follow the rule which are different in zoological and botanical codes. So in zoological and botanical codes are different for the family and subfamily name, and these rules must be followed for the zoological and botanical names, because the plant's name and animals name are different in kind of different for their area, their characters, their speciality. So scientists give the name according to their morphology, their locality, and their speciality. So basically, these formation of family and subfamily name follow the rule which are different in zoology and botanical course. So these rules must be followed for the formation of family and subfamily names. Next one, the name may be based on any part of an animal or a plant and any stage of an organism life history. So according to this rule, the whatever we give the name to that organism, this name must be based on any part of an animal, plant, or any stage of organism life history, which can be easily identified by the people who are not knowing to organism properly. For example, Magnifera indica. So Magnifera indica name indicate the plant is having the locality in India and it is a based in the India. So by just knowing the name of that specific plant, we can identify the plant and their plant species. So the name is mostly based on their part of animal, plant, or any stage of organism life history. So this naming pattern is essential for the identification of organism. So basically this part, any part of animal, plant, or their life history or life pattern, we can give name for their identification. So Panthera leo, Panthera is a in simple way, Panthera is a big cats. So big cats is related to the lions, leopards, tigers. So these are, we can easily identify by the naming, knowing the name of Panthera, they are big cats. So these are names are given by their size. So this type of pattern are followed for the naming. So let's see some recommendation which is essential for make a new name and follow the suggestion for give the scientific name to an organism. First of all, the name should be in Latin and easily converted into Latin form. So whatever name you given to an organism, it must be written in Latin and whatever language you use, it must be easily converted into Latin form. So whatever the name you give that organism, it must contain the Latin language for the identification, because Latin language is accepted as a scientific language for naming the organism. So this name should be in Latin and easily converted in Latin form. Second one, the name should not contain less than 3 and more than 12 letters. So the scientific name of organism, it must contain less than 3 words and more than 12 letters. So it must follow this rule. So name is not contained as a two letters is having not contain the less than 3 and more than 12 letters, because this not not as smaller and not as a bigger. So they can be easily identified and recognized by the people who used to study the scientific language. So this name should follow the this rule for the naming pattern. Third, the name should be easy to pronounce. So whatever name you give the specific organism, it must be easy to pronounce the name of organism by the scientist, taxonomist, and other people for their identification and for their study purpose. So the name should be easy to pronounce the name of organism. Fourth one, the name given should be preferably describe some characteristics of organism. So whatever name you give to that specific organism, the name should refer or describe some characteristics of the organism. For example, Panthera leo. So Panthera is a characteristics which provide the characteristics of big cats, and felis is provide the small cats or jungly cats. So these two names can easily describe the two characteristics of same family, that is family Felidae. So this family Felidae containing having the two genera, that is Panthera and Felis. So Panthera are the big cats like lion, tiger, leopards, and where the Felis contain the jungly cats or house cats. So these two name having the some characteristics of their morphology, their size differences. So these characteristics should be followed in the name. So whatever name you give to that organism, it must contain some characteristics of that organism. Fifth, the name should not be derived from two language. So basically, we know that we follow the binomial nomenclature and trinomial nomenclature to give scientific name to an organism. So whatever language you use to give a name to that organism, it must use the Latin language to give a scientific name to that organism, because Latin language is scientific language for the zoological nomenclature is accepted. So it must be, so name should not be derived from two languages. So whatever language you use must be used the one language to give a name to that organism. The name should not be frivolous. So the name should not be frivolous. So whatever name you give to that organism, it must be meaningful. So this meaningful name should be applicable for that organism by their characteristics, morphology, their locality. From that name, we can easily identify the organism, their locality, their characteristics for their better understanding. So, in this lecture, we're talking about the rules which are applicable for the identification. Sorry, which are applicable for the give scientific name to an organism. That is for today. Thank you.